The universe, for all its vast complexity and mind-bending physics, has a remarkably unimaginative approach. To entertainment, one might think that beings capable of folding space-time like origami would develop pastimes beyond watch things fight. Other things. But no. The galactic conglomerate of advanced species, pretentious name, business casual dress code had spent the last 3 centuries perfecting the art of the combat arena. Not that humans knew this when they stumbled onto the Galactic. Stage wide-eyed and carrying nothing but outdated space probes and an inexplicable collection of cat videos. The diplomatic envoys from Earth had expected many things, perhaps advanced mathematics exchanges, philosophical discussions about the nature of consciousness, or at minimum some form of interstellar happy hour. What they got, instead, was an invitation to the grandest spectacle in 17 star systems, the Nexus Arena. Think of it as cultural exchange through combat, explained Ambassador Zeklak. Of the Vidian hierarchy whose 7 eyes blinked in asynchronous patterns that supposedly conveyed respect, but looked more like a malfunctioning holiday decoration, very prestigious, much honor big entertainment, the ambassador's translator device clearly needed an update. The Nexus Arena floated in neutral space, a massive structure resembling what would happen if someone gave a hyperactive child unlimited resources and told them to design a stadium. It gleamed with materials unknown to human. Science pulsed with energy signatures that made quantum physicists weep and featured concession stands with food that violated several laws of thermodynamics. But its main attraction was simple combat beasts, creatures bred, modified, or evolved for battle, facing off against champions from across the galaxy, and this is where Dax Rian found himself through a series of events involving a diplomatic misunderstanding, 3 shots of something that tasted like gasoline, but was apparently a delicacy, and what he maintained was a completely reasonable response to being called adorably primitive. The human consul was still apologizing as they escorted him to the preparation chambers. This is completely unprecedented, fretted Consul Elgin, whose gray suit somehow looked even more bureaucratic next to the technicolor fashions of the alien spectators. No human has ever participated in the games. We don't even know the rules. Dax shrugged, rolling his shoulders in the strange lightweight armor they provided, a material that felt like silk but supposedly could withstand temperatures hot enough to melt steel. Rules seem simple enough. I go in. Try not to die, entertain the masses, you don't understand. Elgin's voice dropped to a whisper. The combat beasts. They're not just animals, they're intelligent, vicious, and specifically designed to be lethal. The champions who faced them train for decades. Jax's eyes wandered to the viewing screen, where a creature that resembled a cross between a rhinoceros and a nightmare was currently goring something with too many limbs. Yeah, they look cheery. This isn't a joke. When you insulted High Commander Vexer, all I said was his head looked like a genetically modified eggplant. You'd riggered an ancient challenge. Protocol. The only way to avoid interplanetary incident is for you to enter the arena, but nobody expects you to survive more than 5 minutes. Dax sighed, checking the simple utility knife they'd allowed him to keep, apparently bringing actual weapons would be unsporting against creatures whose evolutionary path had basically been become weapon. The knife looked absurdly small against the scale of what he'd be facing. Look, he said. Finally, I grew up on a wildlife preserve in Tanzania, my parents. We're zoologists. I'll be fine, Consul. Elgin looked like she might faint. These aren't Earth animals, these are genetically engineered killing machines from across the galaxy. Dax merely smiled, a specialty that contained multitudes, none of which the Consul found reassuring. Meanwhile, in the observation deck reserved for the Galactic conglomerate's ruling council, conversation buzzed around the upcoming spectacle. A human in the arena arch-director Cran's voice modulator conveyed both amusement and disdain. An impressive feat for synthetic speech. How delightfully primitive. I haven't been this entertained since we discovered those methane breathers who communicate exclusively through interpretive dance. The odds markets are in chaos, remarked Trade Minister Zora, whose species had evolved from something akin to sentient abacuses and had never quite lost their obsession with calculations. 98% probability of death within 3 minutes. Yet the betting volume on human survival exceeds rational parameters. High Commander Vexor still nursing his wounded pride along with a drink that occasionally tried to escape. The glass harumphed through his breathing apparatus. I demand satisfaction. The pink-skinned monkey lacks proper respect, oh please, sighed Culture. Winmere, the only other human in the observation deck. He just said what everyone was thinking. Your head does look like an eggplant. She turned to the others. No offense, but our diplomatic training didn't cover, don't mention physical resemblance to, Earth vegetables in the sensitivity modules. The chamber fell silent as the arena's announcement system activated a voice like melted butter poured over gravel, introducing the audacious human challenger and the most feared collection of combat beasts. Assembled in the last solar cycle, the massive view screen showed Dax entering the arena through a portal that shimmered like disturbed water. The arena itself was a technological marvel, a circular expanse nearly half a kilometer across with terrain that could morph from desert to jungle to Arctic tundra at the control panel's whim. Currently, it displayed a savanna-like setting complete with scattered trees and waist-high golden grass that rippled in an artificial breeze the stands surrounding. It were filled with tens of thousands of beings from hundreds of species, creating a kaleidoscope of color and a cacophony of sound. Dax walked to the center with the casual confidence of someone who either knew exactly what he was doing or had no idea what he was doing but excelled at bluffing the crowd's noise dimmed, slightly, curiosity temporarily overriding bloodlust. Welcome beings of all configurations, the announcer's voice boomed. Today we witness a historic first, a human challenger, facing not one, not two, but 7 of our most illustrious combat beasts. Please activate your translator implants for the human's last words as they should prove entertainingly quaint spotlight. Found Dax in the center of the arena he squinted up at. It then shrugged. Hi, I'm Dax. I'd say it's nice to be here, but honestly, the hospitality's been lacking. Your protein cubes taste like cardboard soaked in battery acid. The translator rendered this in 17, 0 languages simultaneously causing a wave of confused murmuring. Most species were expecting either bravado or pleading not restaurant criticism, and now the announcer continued unperturbed. Let us welcome our magnificent combat beasts. 7 gates opened around the arena's perimeter, and the crowd roared in anticipation. From the gates emerged creatures that seemed designed by evolution or more likely genetic engineering with a single purpose: efficient, spectacular violence. The first was a Pteridian Hellcarver 12 FT of muscle, horn, and hatred. Its 6 eyes glowed ember red, and the bony ridge along its spine discharged occasional sparks of bioelectric energy. It poured, the ground leaving gouges in the reinforced flooring. Next came the Nexorian phantom cat, whose translucent skin revealed a pulsing network of veins carrying luminescent blood. It moved like liquid shadow, its 4-fanged jaw capable of crushing titanium. The third gate revealed a vortex mantis whose bladed limbs had been measured at speeds approaching that of sound, each edge molecularly honed to split atoms if necessary. From the fourth gate slithered the cryogenic worm, its body temperature so low that the air around it crystallized, leaving a trail of frost. As it moved, its 100 eyes blinked in mesmerizing patterns, reported to hypnotize prey. The fifth creature wasn't immediately visible, only a ripple in the air betrayed the presence of the prismatic stalker, whose adaptive camouflage was so perfect. It was technically considered a violation of physics. In some jurisdictions, the sixth gate disgorged what appeared to be a mobile ecosystem rather than a single creature, the hive mind colony, thousands of thumb-sized insectoids moving as one entity, capable of assuming virtually any shape and dissolving organic matter on contact. And finally, from the seventh gate, came what looked like a floating orb of darkness, the Void Sentinel, a being composed of exotic matter that could selectively ignore conventional physics. When convenient, such as when attempting to consume prey, The crowd's roar reached fever pitch as the beasts circled the arena, each establishing territory while sizing up the human morsel in their midst in the royal observation deck. Several counselors leaned forward in anticipation. High Commander Vexor's breathing apparatus wheezed with satisfaction. "Let the spectacle begin," bellowed the announcer. And then something unexpected happened. Actually, unexpected doesn't quite. Cover it reality-shattering might be closer, or perhaps cosmologically improbable, the combat beasts. These paragons of aggression, these living weapons whose genetics had been fine-tuned for violence over centuries, stopped as one they turned toward, Dax, who stood calmly in the center of the arena. And then impossibly inexplicably, they lowered their heads, appendages, sensory clusters, or whatever, passed for the respectful equivalent in their physiology. The silence that followed was so profound, it seemed to have physical weight 70. 000 spectators held their breath or equivalent respiratory function simultaneously. Dax smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a surprise smile. A knowing smile, and the observation deck drinks were dropped. Mandibles clacked in astonishment. Selectively breeding animals and forming deep interspecies relationships. Since before we had written language, High Commander Vexor's breathing apparatus whistled skeptically. What relevance does primitive husbandry have to combat beasts engineered? For maximum aggression, Windelmere gestured toward the arena. Those combat beasts are still animals at their core and humans. Well, some humans have a gift. We call them animal whisperers, beast masters, wildlife communicators, people who can read animal body. Language so fluently, it seems supernatural, who can establish trust with wild creatures that should by all logic tear them apart down in the arena. The Void Sentinel was now orbiting Dax like an affectionate moon, occasionally brushing against him. With what appeared to be tendrils of condensed darkness, the human spoke softly to it. Words the audio system couldn't quite capture. Dax grew up on a wildlife preserve, Windermere continued. His parents rehabilitated dangerous predators. By age 10, he could walk into an enclosure with injured lions. By 15, he was helping capture and relocate aggressive crocodiles, with nothing but his bare hands and an intuitive understanding of reptilian psychology. The preserve specialized in the most dangerous, most traumatized animals, the ones everyone else had given up on. Preposterous, sputtered Vexor. These are not Earth animals, they are genetically engineered killing machines. And yet Windelmere gestured broadly at the arena where the Vortex Mantis was, now performing what appeared to be an elaborately choreographed dance, its bladed limbs catching the light in hypnotic patterns. Here we are, the announcer, after several moments of stunned silence, had finally found his voice again. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of indeterminate or fluctuating gender, we are witnessing something unprecedented in the 300-year history of the Nexus Arena. The human challenger appears to have befriended the combat beasts. The crowd's response was mixed. Confusion, disappointment. From those expecting blood and growing wonder as the display in the arena transformed from an expected slaughter into something more akin to a supernatural circus. Dex had now positioned himself in the center with all 7 beasts arranged around him in a formation that couldn't possibly be coincidental. The Tauridian hell carver knelt on its front limbs, the Nexorian phantom cat stretched out languorously at his feet. The Vortex Mantis stood at attention, bladed limbs folded respectfully. The cryogenic worm formed a glittering spiral pattern on the ground. The prismatic stalker shimmered through a dazzling display of colors. The hive mind colony had reshaped itself into a living throne, and the Void Sentinel hovered protectively above casting, a shadow that somehow seemed comforting rather than menacing. In all my cycles, the announcer's voice had dropped to a reverent hush. I have never witnessed such mastery in the preparation chamber. Conswell Elgin had finally regained the power of speech. We need to get him out of there before something goes wrong. The technician, Beside her, a being with too many limbs and not enough facial features tilted what might have been its head. Wrong what could go wrong. This is the greatest thing that has ever happened in the arena. You don't understand. If the galactic conglomerate realizes humans can do this, can all humans do this? The technician interrupted suddenly. Very interested Elgin hesitated. No, not all, but enough that if they knew back in the Royal Observation Deck, the counselors had reached the same realization trade. Minister Zora's calculating appendages were working so rapidly, they were beginning to smoke the military applications alone, controlling attack beasts without neural implants or chemical restraints. The entertainment potential added another counselor whose species viewed everything through the lens of profit margins. Imagine the viewership for human-beast collaboration spectacles. B. Commander Vexer's breathing had accelerated to an alarming rate. This changes the power dynamics of the entire sector. If humans can control combat beasts, not control corrected Windermere sharply. Communicate. Connect. There's a difference down in the arena. Dax seemed to have reached some form of understanding with his new companions. He climbed onto the back of the tower Idian Hell Carver, which rose majestically to its full height. The other beasts arranged themselves in formation around them. The announcer, ever adaptive, seized the narrative. It appears the human challenger has not only survived but the untamable beings of the galaxy. You are witnessing history. The crowd, initially disappointed by the lack of carnage, had shifted to awe. Many were standing now, creating a wave of rising bodies that rippled through the stadium at top. His unlikely mount rode in a circle around the arena's perimeter, with the 6 other beasts moving in perfect harmony around him. The Hellcarver's bioelectric spine discharged sparks that the Void Sentinel somehow caught and transformed into spiraling patterns of dark light. The hive mind colony flowed alongside like a living river of iridescent particles. The display was beautiful, terrifying, and utterly mesmerizing. At a slight gesture from Dax, the procession halted directly in front of the Royal Observation Deck. The human looked up somehow, knowing exactly where the conglomerate's leadership watched, and smiled. It wasn't a threatening smile. Not exactly, but it wasn't submissive. Either it was the smile of someone who had just changed the rules of the game. In the silence that followed, Dax spoke, his voice carried clearly by the arena's audio system. I think we're done here unless anyone else wants to call me adorably primitive. No one did. I'd like to speak with whoever's in charge of releasing these magnificent beings back to their natural habitats. They don't belong in an arena. The Tidian needs a high-oxygen environment with magnetic field lines to surf. The Nexorian should be in twilight forests with plenty of vertical space to climb. The Vortex Mantis requires sonic resonance chambers to properly mold. He continued through detailed ecological needs for each creature, information that even their handlers didn't fully understand. In the Royal Observation Deck, jaws dropped in species possessing them. How could he possibly know? Began Arch-Director Kresina. I listened to them. Windermere said simply, that's what animal whisperers do. High Commander Vexacor, whose mood had shifted from outrage to calculation, leaned forward. Your human has impressive talents. Perhaps we have been hasty in our assessment of your species. Perhaps, agreed Windermere with diplomatic vagueness. Down in the arena, Dax dismounted from the Hellcarver with fluid grace. He placed one hand on the creature's massive snout in farewell, then turned to walk toward the exit portal. All 7 combat beasts followed, him like an honor guard escorting royalty. The announcer, never missing an opportunity for drama, called out, the human challenger departs unscathed, triumphant, and with 7 of the galaxy's deadliest creatures treating him like a beloved alpha. What does this mean for the future of inter-species relations? What does it mean for the combat arena? This humble announcer cannot say, but one thing is certain, the galaxy will never be the same. As the portal prepared to receive Dax and his unlikely entourage, the human paused and looked back at the assembled crowd. 70,000 beings from across the galaxy stared back at him in collective amazement. Next time, Dex called out, voice echoing through the silent arena. Maybe just invite us for dinner and conversation less dramatic but probably more productive." With that, he stepped through the portal, the 7 combat beasts following without hesitation. The moment they disappeared, the crowd erupted not in anger or disappointment, but in thunderous or struck applause that transcended species and language in the diplomatic quarters. Hours later, Consul Elgin was still trying to process the day's events. "You realize what you've done. Every power in the galaxy is now reassessing humanity's potential threat level." Dax sprawled casually in a chair, designed for a being with very different anatomy. Shrugged good. "Maybe they'll stop calling us adorable and start treating us as equals. The Vidian hierarchy has already sent a formal request for human-beast communication specialists to assist with ecological restoration on 3 of their worlds," Elgin said, scanning through messages on her tablet, the Nexus. "Arena management wants to transform their combat spectacles into interspecies harmony demonstrations, and High Commander Vexa," she paused, expression unreadable, "has invited you to dinner." Dax raised an eyebrow. "To poison me?" "I don't think so," the message mentioned something about his private collection of rare fauna that has been behaviorally challenging. Dax grinned. "See, sometimes all it takes is a little demonstration of competence to change minds." "That wasn't a little demonstration. You rewrote Galactic. Power dynamics in 15 minutes with nothing but a pocket K knife and whatever bizarre human magic lets you charm giant killing machines." "It's not magic," Dax said more seriously. "Now it's respect. Those creatures aren't mindless weapons. They're intelligent. Beings with needs, fears, and desires. No one had ever bothered to listen to them before. But that's not in any of our briefing materials about the combat beasts," Elgin protested. "We were told they were essentially biological weapons, with minimal higher consciousness." Dax laughed, the sound genuine but tinged with sadness. "And who wrote those briefing materials? The same people who profit from pitting these beings against each other in glorified bloodsport Fairpoint." Elgin conceded. "Those creatures. In the arena, they're traumatized. Elgin, the Hell Carver, its species naturally uses bioelectric discharges for communication. Not combat, they're empathic grazers. In the wild, the shock collar they modified into its spine causes constant pain, which they've weaponized." Began's eyes widened. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because it told me," Dax replied. "Simply not with words, but with body language, with micro-movements, with the patterns of its discharge. You know how earth horses pin their ears back when, Stressed same principle, just with a 12-tallion death rhino." A soft chime interrupted them. A priority message on Elgin's tablet. Her eyes scanned the text, then widened in disbelief. "What is it?" Dax asked. "The Galactic Conglomerate Council is convening an emergency session topic. Reassessment of human integration into galactic society. Your little arena stunt has their full attention." Jax winced. "Is that good or bad? Unprecedented is what it is." Elgin replied, "They're requesting your presence, not as a curiosity or test subject, but as a consultant on Interesia's communication, huh?" Dax seemed genuinely surprised, didn't see that coming. Neither did anyone else in the galaxy. Elgin's voice had taken on a note of cautious hope. "This could change everything. For Earth's standing, we've been struggling to prove our worth beyond our admittedly underwhelming technology and resource offerings. But this is unique." "Don't get too excited," Dax warned. "Not all humans can do what I do. I had specialized training, unique experiences, but the basic capacity is there." Eldra countered. "Think about it. Throughout human history, we formed partnerships with animals that other species simply couldn't achieve. Dogs, horses, falcons. Even working relationships with relatively unrelated creatures like elephants and dolphins. That ability is built into our evolutionary history." A different chime sounded the ship's internal communication system. The voice of Captain Brooks, commander of the diplomatic vessel, came through with unusual urgency. "Consul Elgin, we're receiving unprecedented communication requests from 17 different species governments, and something else. You should come to the bridge immediately." 20 minutes later, Dax stood alongside Elgin Captain Brooks and the ship's senior staff staring in disbelief at the main view screen outside the ship. Floating in the vacuum of space were hundreds of creatures, space-adapted species from across the galaxy, many of which humans had never encountered before. Massive, translucent beings, resembling jellyfish with crystalline organs visible through their pulsing membranes, swarms of metallic-looking entities that moved in perfect geometric patterns, long serpentine creatures with bioluminescent markings shifting in complex sequences. "What are they doing?" Captain Brooks asked, voice hushed. With all the xenobiology officer, Dr. Mehta was rapidly scanning the gathering with every sensor at her disposal. "They're congregating peacefully species that we have documented. Records of actively avoiding or even attacking each other, but they're coexisting." "And why are they gathered around our ship specifically?" Ellen asked. All eyes turned to Dax, who'd gone very still. "They know I'm here," he said quietly. "That's impossible," Dermetta objected. "Many of these species don't have sensory organs capable of detecting life forms through a starship hull. Some don't even perceive the electromagnetic spectrum the way we do, and yet," Dax gestured at the gathering. "Here they are as if..." Responding to his words, the assembled space creatures began to move in concert, a slow, graceful spiral around the human vessel, creating patterns of light and movement that seemed both deliberate and beautiful. "They're communicating," Dr. Mehta whispered. Watching her instruments with each other and possibly with us, the ship's communication officer spoke up. "We're receiving a transmission from the Arch-Director Kazanal Priority Alpha. The massive jellyfish-like creatures outside began to pulse with increasingly complex patterns of bioluminescence. Their crystalline organs, refracting light in hypnotic sequences, put the Arch-Director through Captain Brooks, ordered the alien leader's synthetic voice, filled the bridge. Human diplomatic. "Vessel, are you observing the phenomenon surrounding your ship?" "We are," Arch-Director Elgin replied. "We're as surprised as you must be. This is unprecedented." The alien leader stated these space-dwelling species rarely interact with technological civilizations. Many have been classified as non-sentient or minimally communicative, and yet they appear to be performing for your vessel, not for the vessel. Elgin said, glancing at Dax for someone on board. There was a long pause before Kratzen responded. "Thea Reyna? Participant, yes." Another pause. "The emergency council session has been upgraded to highest priority. We request immediate transport of the human Dax Riordan to conglomerate headquarters." After the communication ended, the bridge remained silent for several moments, all eyes still fixed on the cosmic ballet taking place outside, so Dax finally said with forced lightness, "Does this mean I get diplomatic immunity for the whole eggplant head incident?" Elgin couldn't help but laugh despite the tension. "I think you've graduated from diplomatic incident to diplomatic breakthrough as the human ship prepared for departure to conglomerate headquarters." The space creatures followed, maintaining formation around the vessel like an honor guard news. Traveled faster than the ship itself across subspace channels. The human who had tamed arena beasts was now somehow communing with deep space entities previously thought to be beyond communication. The implications were staggering if humans possessed an innate ability to connect with such a diverse range of species. What might this mean for the future of galactic diplomacy, for ecological restoration of war-torn worlds, for understanding species previously dismissed as non-sentient in the quiet? Of his quarters, Dax stared out the viewport at his unusual escorts. One of the jellyfish-like creatures had positioned itself directly in his line of sight, its crystalline structure pulsing in patterns that seemed oddly familiar. "I hear you," he whispered, though he couldn't have explained exactly what he meant by that in the royal observation deck of the now empty Nexus Arena cultural attaché. Winmere sat alone, watching recordings of the day's events with a small, satisfied smile. She had known, or at least suspected, what might happen when Dax entered that arena. There was a reason she had pushed for his inclusion in the diplomatic mission despite his lack of formal qualifications. humanity's first contact specialist. She murmured to herself, raising a glass of alien liquor and a toast to the empty arena. Just not the kind anyone expected elsewhere in the vast tapestry of the galaxy. The news spread from world to world, system to system. On 1,000 planets, beings gathered around communication terminals to witness the human who spoke the universal language that transcended species barriers. On a 100 ships, captains altered course to intercept the human diplomatic vessel's path, hoping for a glimpse of the cosmic procession accompanying it, and in the vast cold reaches between stars, other entities stirred, ancient patient beings who had watched the rise and fall of countless civilizations, who had long ago given up hope of meaningful communication with the busy, brilliant, short-lived technological species that skewered between worlds, perhaps. They whispered to each other in languages of gravity and light. It was time to listen again. Elgin shook her head in wonder of all the ways humanity might make its mark on the galactic stage. Combat beast whispering was not on anyone's prediction matrix. That's always been humanity's superpower, hasn't it? Ducks mused. Not superior technology or physical strength, but our ability to form connections with other species, to see intelligence where others see only resources or weapons. Outside the viewport, the vast structure of the Nexus Arena gleamed against the backdrop of unfamiliar stars. Already news of the day's events was spreading across subspace channels to every corner of the galactic conglomerate. The universe, it seemed, had just become a slightly more interesting place, and somewhere in the diplomatic vessel's cargo hold, carefully separated into appropriate habitats, 7 combat beasts rested peacefully for the first time in their existence, awaiting transport to sanctuaries more suited to their true natures. The universe's most feared arena competitors now retired, all because one human had walked into an arena alone, and every combat beast had lowered its head, as it turned out, in a galaxy obsessed with dominance. The most revolutionary act was understanding.